I enjoy interrogating people, so these will be my victims today. Dima, sitting closest to me, how about I start with you? Okay, so some argue that authenticated delegation is the non-negotiable foundation for trustworthy agentic AI, yet global standards are embryonic at best. If we fail to standardise cryptographic proof of human authorisation and action scope within, say, 24 months, what specific societal or security catastrophes become inevitable and why? I said interrogation, I meant it.
Yeah, that's a big one. But if we take a step back, I think agentic AI is coming whether we like it or not. And looking at the people in the room, whether you're a bank or insurance company, agentic AI will probably be an additional interface, an additional channel for your customers to interact with you. So we can implement agentic AI and support agentic AI in a secure manner or insecure manner. We can do it in a more privacy-preserving way or less privacy-preserving way. Agentic AI is different, and the reason why it's different because it's less deterministic. It can call other agents and delegate in its own right. It's a lot of times it sits outside of your organizational boundary as well. So we have to deal with that. And if we deal with it in different ways, there are three possible outcomes. One is agentic AI becomes successful and enhances everyone's lives. The second outcome is it potentially can go nowhere because we haven't solved those security and privacy issues. And the third one, there could be a global catastrophe in a sense that we give too much power to something that we don't fully understand. And because it's action-oriented, it can create a lot of issues going forward.
So it's not inevitable, it's a possibility.
It's a possibility, and it's up to us right now to decide how we deal with it. Do we approach it in a secure, trusted way, or do we just let it run?
Look, Victor, governments globally are racing to adopt AI agents. What do you see being the most significant institutional or legal constraints that could prevent the public sector from implementing authenticated delegation at scale? And where do you see the greatest opportunities for breakthrough?
Well, I don't know whether governments are racing towards it because I think governments are really, really slow and they're on the back foot in terms of agentic AI. I see it as I even travel around this great nation, how should we say, how reticent governments are to innovate, but that goes to another topic. But we need to do it because the reality is the world is moving that way. You get places like Abu Dhabi and Dubai and Singapore where governments are forward leaning. They're going into a government 3.0 mode. They're definitely looking at how they can use it. But in the Five Eyes in particular, struggling. The main impediment is identity. When you think about an agent, we've had agents for ages. I can appoint a real estate agent to act on my behalf, or I can appoint a lawyer to be my power of attorney. Like we are used to the concept of agency in law, but a real estate agent or a lawyer, they are flesh and bones, right? So they've got an identity. An agentic or a digital agent does not necessarily attach to an identity unless we have a digital identity. We don't have a true digital identity in this great country of ours. We're working towards one. The great Ian Opperman, who I work with very closely. He is now the consumer data rights czar and the ID czar in the country. So all weight and power to him. He's going to have to orchestrate what this standard looks like so we get this interoperable model. But until we get true federated digital ID in this country, it's going to be really, really hard to get an agentic age adopted by government because who is it? you've got to land ID.
Yeah, absolutely. Ralph, critical infrastructure is now the front line for both AI opportunity and risk. What are the most urgent threats that you see in the delegation frameworks, not robustly implemented in sectors like energy, transport, or health? And how should industries respond?
So for me, it's a really interesting one. Having delivered critical national infrastructure around the world for various different programs, I personally don't see the challenge of either machine sort of identity or even the individual identity as being a technical one anymore. I mean, we can turnkey digital ID ecosystems and machine-based digital, data sharing ecosystems in a very short period of time. So, for example, New Zealand's confirmation of payee was done in 3 months. And that involves a whole bunch of machine-to-machine digital identities, all working under a trust framework to go and solve confirmation of payee. And we're turnkeying that model in different locations. The UAE, same sort of timescale, 6 months. Brazil, less than 12. So building data sharing ecosystems where you have technology, machines talking to each other and software talking to servers, for me, really isn't sort of the problem. And then the technical standards for digital ID for humans is also sort of relatively, defined. I mean, you've got various different technology standards that you can use, all of which give some of the basic capabilities of things like signed proof of identity, signed proof of authorization. So for me, the challenge here isn't so much necessarily the identity standards for agentic commerce. For me, it's an authorization problem in terms of if you take the CDR or you take other sort of data sharing ecosystems, we started from a domain where everybody understood the context of what it is that we are sharing. Let's take the most basic. I give a piece of software permission to post on my Facebook wall. Post wall, one of the most basic and well understood sort of scopes of access that you can give somebody to, do something on your behalf, known by me as a user, known by Facebook, and known by a relying party. We then move into some of the more, evolutions of, say, the consumer data right or open banking, where consent starts becoming more, nuanced. I want to share my credits with my current account, but only if it's over $500 for 4 weeks and only, single-use access. So I'll give you 2 times to request my data. But when you get into the realms of agentic AI, the biggest challenge I see for these use cases is industry and potentially government actually being able to codify the context, taking the legal sort of constraints of what it means to delegate to be a real estate agent. I mean, when was the last time you bought and sold a house and you actually said to the real estate agent, so exactly what can and can't you do for me into excruciating sort of detail and show me the code of practice that you've all signed up to so I know exactly what you can't do? I mean, we've all spoken to real estate agents and they say, oh, sorry, mate, I can't tell you how much this house is going for. But if you were going to put it somewhere, where, the grey zone is where we operate, but we still have that human sort of relationship where you can look someone in the eye and work out whether or not you think they're operating in your best interest. When you're talking about context for LLMs, it becomes exceptionally very, very challenging to get that same sort of feel and a surety that they are actually doing what you said that they were authorized to do. So that's where I see the biggest challenges for this.
Absolutely. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. It still feels like there's no 2 countries that are approaching this the same way. Which, Dima, leads me to the next question. With so many competing standards and frameworks emerging globally, what's the risk of fragmentation in delegation protocols, and what can Australia do to ensure our systems remain interoperable and internationally credible?
I think it's true to say that we have some standards in this space. We have some standards in this space. We probably don't have enough standards in this space. And like we said before, I think that delegation and authority is not a new concept for us. We have been exploring it, but we've never codified it. We've never been able to implement it on a technical level. There is always a sort of a backstop. Worst case scenario, we'll get a person in the room, we'll check their ID, and we'll check what they are required to do. So there is always that manual intervention that's possible, which is not going to be possible with agentic AI at all. And that's where I see the problem. There are some standards that cover some areas. the biggest danger for me, which we probably averted now, is so this AI community used to be quite separate from, and it is quite separate from identity community. They don't have the same understanding of concept of authentication authorization. The first version of a MCP protocol came out without any mentioning of authentication. So since then, there has been a bit of work happening to join those communities together. So identity folks got together with AI folks, and then the next version of MCP protocol released a couple of weeks ago already had a concept of authentication, already had a new role, which is authorization server, which wasn't really a thing before. So there is more understanding that authentication is required, there is authorization required, but there's still a lot of work to do. And the biggest danger is that everyone does it their own way. So we haven't solved this problem in CDR 100%, so we haven't gone all the way to fine-grained authorization, which we will have to sort out for agentic AI. Because, like I said before, it's action-oriented. The potential damage is much harder, especially if agents starts delegating to other agents. We can't do the same thing that the enterprises used to do in their own sort of backyard anymore, where you have one super token that they just pass around that has access to everything, or allows you to do things to everything. It's between organizations, they're never going to work.
Can I just jump in there a little, just 2 seconds? So the great thing about the last release over the MCP, for those of you, how many people know if I say MCP, do you know what I'm talking about? Half, okay. Basically, it's a way of a server talking to an AI, talking to an LM to say, this is how you can talk to me. And obviously,
the next level is an API.
It's the next level way of discrete. So you had things. If I said open API specification or Swagger specification, does everyone know what I mean? Think about MCP server as the way of describing your services, not necessarily your APIs, but your services, which can include APIs to a large language model. This model and this protocol, when it was originally created, was complete Wild West. But what I'm really happy to see is actually, I think there is a lot of standardization going on, because very quickly the industry said, we want to go real fast with LLMs. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. And that's a big lesson that we've seen, and a real big sort of relief for me, and gives me a little bit of comfort in that the industry isn't really interested in reinventing the wheel where it doesn't have to. So the latest version now includes references to RFCs, doesn't include references to drafts, it doesn't include references to new things. It says, use this, use this, use this. And these things that have been created usually off the back of things like the consumer data right or open banking in the UK. So everyone is starting to build on some of the standards that have gone, before. And in terms of global interoperability, that core sort of base layer of foundations, we are more interoperable than you think. So for example, the Brazil ecosystem, the UAE ecosystem, the UK ecosystem, and the New Zealand ecosystem, and ConnectID are all based on the same sort of core foundational interoperable standards from a trust and identity point of view. The layers that then go on top of those do vary slightly depending on the industry that they're in, but we are actually evolving towards sort of that common trust and identity standard. So it is possible for you to deliver the same ecosystem, services and the same trust framework and the same fabric for your own digital services, including potentially LLM, that are interoperable with these other schemes from a technical trust point of view. Where I still think we're missing is we don't have policy alignment, we don't have regulatory alignment, and we don't have that bit that's really missing, which is that consent and authorization piece, where we all understand what we all mean when we're talking about delegation of consent. Because, when you get to things like GDPR in Europe, it was a bit of a failure because clear unbundled consent in the days of large language models is going to be, and agentic commerce is going to be a very difficult thing for everyone to wrap their heads around.
Some of the language, instead of just consent, it's about control. I think that's the new narrative. Like, sure, consent, but that's weak in many ways. We should be saying, how do we empower you to control your data, your authorizations? And I think that's the term of empowerment. And that's what we need to start focusing on in digital ID and credential space.
Absolutely. Now, Victor, I know you were part of the State Government Data and Digital Ministers
CDMM
group consortium. What do we want to call it? It was Good old times. I used to try to teach them about open data. That was a whole different topic. Yep. So given the complexity and fragmentation of current AI policy frameworks across all levels of government, not just federal, state, probably not at the local level yet, how can we ensure that delegation standards and accountability mechanisms are consistent?
Well, it's a great question, and it goes to what Ralph was saying. Like we need that policy framework in the country. Like when we set up the DDMM, I was one of the inaugural members of it. It was the reason we did it was because everything was all over the shop, and we needed to bring everyone together. Like we were doing our digital ID, one of the first in the world, in the form of a de facto ID in the form of a digital driver's license. But there wasn't even an international standard at that time, let alone an Australian standard. The Queenslanders came out, South Australia came out. Like we were all, and I said, like, this is madness. Let's get all the data digital ministers together, and the feds, to their credit, corralled everyone. So the idea around DDMM is to try and harmonise that. I'll give you an example. When we were the first jurisdiction, again with the great Ian Opperman leading the charge, to have the world's first AI assurance framework. There was us in Singapore in 2021. It's now an AI assurance assessment. Now, no other jurisdiction were in our country, at least, and I think it was only Singapore at the time, were even thinking about it. We're all talking about it now, but in 2021 in the teeth of COVID, they weren't thinking about it. I remember going to those DDMM meetings and saying, here we are, guys, this is coming. Everyone else was busy putting out COVID. The reality is, because it was such a good standard, WA, correct me if I'm wrong, Ian, have pretty much copied and pasted our standard. When I say ours, New South Wales. Other jurisdictions are aligning to it, and the federal government has recently adapted it. I was speaking to New Zealand. They've told me they'll pick up 95% of it and obviously nuance it to their local jurisdictions. But the point is, we need these forums, and ideally, it should be coming from the very, very top. You know, Australia and New Zealand should be talking together and saying these are standard, and then filter down. But you know, that's a bit. I guess that's the beauty and the curse of federation. You know, how do you bring all these things together? Because if you don't, we're going to get into this world where the left hand doesn't know what the right's doing, and Jim Chalmers, to his eternal credit, is talking about productivity. Very hard to get productivity if you don't get the standards right.
100%. So,
I can probably add to that. I think and another challenge, I think Ralph highlighted, there is a policy issue to be solved. I think Victor spoke that policy needs to be solved, technology needs to be solved, but there is another problem that is consistently changing, and the pace of change is enormous. You know, amount of time it took us from Gen AI to Agentic AI to talk about it as it's a real thing that can be used right now. It was quite short, but the parameters of also the landscape itself has changed significantly. So if we had a policy 2 years ago, that's probably out of date now. So my point is all the standards, all the policies, they have to be continuously changed.
Yeah.
Yes, and that means that you need to delegate appropriate ability to change these policies at the appropriate level. So where you do need a national joined up approach is some of the basic sort of foundational. So we're not arguing, you know, unless you're talking about driver's licenses. But you know, I can pick up a phone and call someone in the UK and it all works because we've got basic levels of interoperability from a basic set of standards. So if the government or someone can at least align the basic infrastructure, the basic rules of the road, the basic methodologies for communication and security, accreditation, that is something that, well, governments have been doing that since day dot, and they have a very, very valuable role to play. But the governments won't be able to keep up with the pace of innovation for every single different sector. They'll move at different paces. There'll be different sort of levels of outside force will be driving that different levels of innovation. So working with industry to be able to look at how do we safely codify that consent, codify that authorization, to be able to delegate the appropriate level of responsibility to the appropriate level, like, you know, real estate agents, you know, the codes of conduct, etc. How do we qualify that and create enough context around it such that an LLM can be certified against that context? And how do we, you know, delegate and push enough responsibility to the areas that need to own that responsibility without compromising the levels of interoperability, amongst them all. So, for example, if you take sort of federation, as you were talking about, as I said, the 5 different markets I just mentioned earlier are broadly interoperable because different bodies have been responsible for the creation of those different standards. So security was very much the OpenID Foundation. Some of the additional consent mechanisms are IETF standards. So there's appropriate bodies that are delegated to create some of these sort of foundational capabilities. Then you're going to need to look at the policy layer and say, well, we need an appropriate body at the top to provide the guardrails from which we can delegate and push different levels of responsibility down to. That's one of the reasons why Open Finance in Brazil went so fast, is that they were able to set a common set of requirements at the top, but then push down into security, push down into accountancy, push down into payments, push down into insurance, the various different working groups and stakeholders to be able to then create those specifications and agree amongst themselves what they were going to iterate and publish. So you ended up with multiple different streams of innovation across industry, but actually all governed and managed from the same sort of strong technical surety and security standards that enable common interoperability and confidence that whatever they're doing meets the requirements for security, governance, and oversight.
Ralph, industry will always innovate because they're not shackled by the constraints of government. But government's about 30% of the market, right? 25, 30% of the market. So if government innovates in industry, that empowers industry as well, right? So absolutely. How do we get government to innovate? That's the real challenge, and I think that's where we're really, really struggling.
It's a fundamental one. So in the UK, the FCA has just launched its AI sandbox. It's actually a positive sort of step to turn around and say, we understand this. We understand it's going to be a potentially totally different model to the way we currently accredit, govern, and regulate financial services advice, but we need to do it because if we don't explore and test, well, people are going to do it on their own. I mean, I know that I do it myself, dump in a whole bunch of different financial data into various different analytics engines and say, go and compare these two, and it spits out some results. Hope it's right. I made some trade decisions based on it. Maybe we'll see how it works out or not. But that's on, I acknowledge that that's on me. And I have got a clear understanding that if it goes wrong, that's on me. It's my services that I created. The government, there are a lot of people out there that will have an expectation when they talk to these sort of services that there is somebody supporting them, there is somebody still backing up and providing that backstop liability framework, for protecting those individuals. So if we don't at least very clearly educate people, we're in for a whole world of pain. So the government either has to decide it's going to step in, or it has to start an education program to say, we're stepping out and you're on your own, because otherwise, everyone's going to get the finger pointed at them to say it's your fault, or your fault, because increasingly we're seeing no one wants to take responsibility for agency. And that's a real interesting concept when you're talking about large language, driven agents. Who are the agents working for? They're working for, individuals theoretically, but they're run by someone else. So, whose agency and agents are they? It's a question that I think only government can answer.
Anybody that's been involved in open banking on the consumer data right, apart from being psychologically scarred, this has been going on for 7 years. 7 years now. Policy's still not finished being created. The rules aren't finished being created. People like poor Ian here have to now solve for mountains of unintended consequences and bringing it all together at the same time as creating next generation, which is probably why most of the people in this room are going to move way faster than regulation can. So I'm going to open it up to whoever wants to answer this. How can we commercialize data sharing and agent-based delegation without undermining the roots of trust that critical infrastructure depends upon? What role do industry-led standards play here?
Maybe can I just pick up on, try and merge the two. I think government must, government is, whether we like it or not, is an anchor tenant of society. So it has to regulate because self-regulation is not good enough in this world.
Become America, right?
Correct. Wild West and some scary things happen. So government needs to, but it needs to innovate, and I think that's our fundamental challenge. And how do we do it? Like we particularly the Five Eyes. The Five Eyes I'll be honest. I think we're complacent. We don't have famine. We don't have wars in our backyard. Like if you're Estonia, you've got a little thing called Russia next door. Singapore's a benevolent dictatorship. Abu Dhabi, you make a decision and things happen, right? We are complex democracies and things go slow. How do you innovate? Because we're all risk damn averse. I think we need to rethink government itself and government structures itself. For example, in a government 3.0 world, the Auditor General. Well, I don't love the Auditor General, but the Auditor General AG does a great role. But it looks over the shoulder. It looks, oh, did you do this? Did you do that? Did you do this? It's retrospective. Imagine if the Auditor General also had a very positive task of saying, did you innovate? You failed to innovate. And failure to innovate is a risk. So you just can't do these things and just tick every damn box. Not good enough anymore. Where is your innovation sandbox? How are you experimenting safe, including AI and the agents? I go to so many departments at the moment, they are scared to use the word AI. Scared, don't let it cross the lips, let alone agents. It paralyzes them, I'm telling you. So we got to change our mindset in this great country to help the rest of community, capitalize on what's coming.
I think it's a great one. And again, we operate globally, but if everyone knows that if you can get a credit in Australia, you can pretty much operate anywhere in the world. And the problem for that is that the level of regulation and constraint is really, really quite high. Now, if you think about context, you're talking really now starting to talk into code of conducts and sort of legalese. So if you talk to an LLM and you say, here's all the regulation, find me a justification so I can do something, not find me a justification why I can't do something. You get a whole bunch of lawyers in a room and you ask them, can I do this? Actually, you don't care about the 9 that tell you that you can't. You actually are more interested in talking to the one that tells you that you can. So having the appropriate support from government, where, as you said, there is the boundaries where you have that sort of space.
A license to innovate. Yeah.
Otherwise, let's talk about what was the topic you started with, which was doomsday type scenarios. Well, if this is a doomsday type scenario, and Australia is so far been relying on its, as you said, the lucky country. It's in, we have no imperative really to innovate. We can dig stuff out of the ground. We've got, come in, no problem. Everyone wants to be here. But if AI is as successful or as dangerous as people think, well, then you are talking about radical sort of social change, and it will be driven from overseas. Why would I need to use an Australian advisor for financial services when I can buy and sell stocks and shares and invest in anything around the world? I'll just use an LLM that's hosted in the United States, right? But why not? There's nothing stopping me from to use that sort of services. So you're talking about worst case scenario, Australia's failure to innovate, leaving it at the mercy of the rest of the world, and that is certainly something that I see with all of these other markets that we're engaged in. The pace of innovation, sometimes I think there is not enough regulation from government to provide consumer support, and sometimes I think, certainly here, there's sometimes too much.
Dima,
So back to your CDR point, I think whichever way you look at it, LLMs need data, and the good news is that we can reuse what we already have. So whether it's someone building MCP server for CDR or MCP server for ConnectID or for even Agdis, we can plug in existing data sources into AI agents and let them make the right decisions in a secure and more privacy-preserving way.
Yep, using what we've got with full consent, of course.
No, 100%. This is what I'm saying. The MCP server for CDR makes a lot of sense to me because it can definitely reuse secure connections to the banks, as opposed to at the moment, if we do nothing, it'll be screen scraping all over again. Yeah.
As we automate more supervision and oversight of AI delegates, how do we avoid the trap of rubber stamp governance? And what practical steps can organisations take to ensure that delegation remains accountable, auditable, and aligned with human values as agents become more autonomous?
I think it comes down, we partially probably answered this question. I don't think we have any freedom of rubber stamping at all with AI agents. We were able to do it with the previous agency, with the previous manual delegation. There's always a way, yeah, we'll work around. There's organizational boundary that organization might be liable or a person might go to jail. So with AI agents, we're not going to have all of those mechanisms to constrain the right behavior. That's why I don't think we have a choice. We can't rubber stamp it. And this is where you start looking at, ecosystem of trusted agents and trusted manufacturers of those agents and trusted models and based on trusted data or trained on trusted data. So there is so much you can go just to make it completely foolproof. But the bottom line is, I think everyone needs to think about it and need to think about it holistically from ecosystem perspective.
So it sounds like trust is the main word in all aspects. Does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns?
Peter Theodoros, I'm a partner at UX Law. Apologies for starting with the legal question, but I am a lawyer. What I'm really interested in is liability. Rather than touching on the grey zone of agents, let's say I set up an AI agent to do my online shopping. And it does a great job. Then my wife's birthday's coming up, and it spends $1,000 to buy champagne on my behalf. What happens then? Do I have to pay the $1,000 for champagne? Can I say no? Can I blame the agent? Can I say the shop wasn't me, it was the agent?
Do you want to take it?
I'm happy to have a crack at that because I used to be a lawyer until I reformed. But stay the path, stay the path. And what about if you have a double agent or a sleeper agent? You know what I mean? Like, if there was a hack into the system. So I love the concept that Victoria raised that I hadn't heard before, which is know your agent. This is huge. And for me, digital identity is absolutely the North Star. But what hangs off digital identity? It's credentials. It's the identity is the who. The what is credentials, because that's what you can do. I can be a real estate, I can be a lawyer, I can do work with kids. And then there's the where. That's the third piece of the pie. That is, place, space, and time, but where in terms of the agent, jurisdiction. So, do I trust that agent? Because it's got security, it's got privacy, it's got authority all the way down. These are massive questions around know your agent. So I won't trust you unless I know your agent has come from a server that I can trust. Because if there's recourse, I can go back to the server because it's become a rogue agent or it's left its defenses down. These are huge questions that we've got to work through. So I think this concept of know your agent is going to be really large in terms of legal circles as well.
From a trust framework point of view and the technology standards, they already exist to be able to support that. At the end of the day, an agent is another piece of software. And the question then is who's governing that software, who owns that software, who's running that software, and what was the relationship of you to that software. Now, I'm not saying that you can't run your own agent. You can train your own agent. Anyone can. Download some software, give it some data, go and run it on your local machine, and you can set it loose. It's your piece of software. You can get it to do whatever you like. In the same way as you can write a piece of code today to say, take a request, do something to it, put in a random number generator and say, I want to buy $1,000 worth of flowers, and you stuff up the decimal point in the wrong spot, and you buy those flowers. It's your software. In the same model applies for any sort of service that we operate on, online. It is also still possible inside the context to be able to restrict those agents based on rules and scheme rules so that it can't step out of boundaries.
If I use my agent and I have a drug addiction and I use my agent to, create a pattern that makes my addiction worse, this is where it starts getting grey.
Sure.
And where governments need to sit over the top.
Sure. The challenge with all of this is I'd ask,
so do I sue Apple for allowing me to create a Frankenstein agent?
Can you delegate to your, and this is what I say, if it's your agent that you've written, can you delegate to yourself to be able to, can you do it? Could you log on to your internet banking right now and do it? And if you can, and it's in your control and there's no obligation for you to stop and say, should I do this to myself? Then there's no technical, there's two things.
No, there's no technical.
There's no technical way. So how can I, legislative, what I'm going to do, write a piece of legislation to say you can't do this to yourself.
We do that right now.
Okay.
You cannot commit suicide. That's law.
I totally agree, but you're going to come after me if I do.
No, but we put restrictions in place to make sure we do the best that you don't.
Absolutely.
So we don't say, hey, go and kill yourself.
No. So I'm not asking you to. I'm absolutely not asking you to.
Sorry.
Set limits, you can. But then use the example of code. But this is different from code, because code is a fixed thing.
Oh, no. Code is not a fixed thing. I could put random number generators and random action behaviors into my code if I choose to do so.
The point is, with a piece of software, I can tell the software exactly what to do. An LLM, you can't tell exactly what to do. It's a black box. It makes its own.
You're 100% correct, but I can download a piece of software that randomly does stuff as well. So if I know full well that I'm downloading a piece of software that may randomly do stuff that I've written myself, there's no obligation or guarantee that, I can build a gambling piece of application, that's going to screen scrape gambling websites and just go yes, and pick some random numbers and shove them into a form. I can do that as a random piece of software. So and this is what comes back to agency and expectation. If it's my agent for me running on my machines that I've trained, it's my agency. What you're asking though is from a liability point of view, if it's someone else's agent that somebody's licensing or has an expectation of certain behaviors, patterns, or obligations for safety, surety, or any of the other codes of conduct, that's one of the real challenges. However, because it is still a piece of software running on a server somewhere, owned by someone offering a service, you can accredit that organization. Now, whether or not any organization is going to want to be accredited and actually be comfortable enough assuring that process, and back to your point, how can you ever assure a piece of software is going to do exactly what you want it to do when you know it's got randomized elements, in it? That's really, 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 really hard. And that's where the government does have to come up with a balanced view to allow that innovation and that relative unknown. Otherwise, it just won't happen. No one will offer those sort of services in a regulated type market in this country. But it will happen overseas.
I love how we went from a present for the wife to $1,000 worth of flowers to Frankenstein and suicide. Look, you have to be here to believe it. This conversation could go all day and these guys could definitely talk all day if we let them. But please join me in thanking Ralph Bragg, Victor Dominello, and Dima Postnikov.